The religious like to think that they can discredit the non-religious, but they can never ever manage it, can they? Instead, they just wind up making themselves look bad, and for that, they don't need any of our help, do they? We just need to recognize what it is that they're doing wrong, and this will be a fine example of that. They are their own worst enemies, as if that's any surprise. Let's do some more red letter media. Now, I am not a fan of Tim Barnett any more than I'm a fan of anybody currently or formerly at Stands Against Reason. They all come off as complete con men, and honestly, that's probably because they are. This time, Tim wants to show us a video of someone doing something he's impressed by, even though, if we're honest, he probably shouldn't be. In fact, it shows why he and his shyster friends are such a problem. And I'll let you figure that out for yourselves as we go on. So let's get into it.
Oh, hi there.
And if you ever watch Cinema Sins, you know that eating an apple makes you look like a complete asshole. So I guess that's one YouTube meme that's been proven correct. Anyway, get on with it.
So there's a video of Canadian Conservative Party leader that's gone viral because it's, well, awesome. It features Pierre Poilievre eating an apple while being interviewed by a local journalist.
So he's an asshole too. I mean, yes, this is a joke for people who can't tell, but Tim really isn't doing himself any favors. This is a trope in a lot of movies and TV shows where the director will just hand evil characters an apple to eat because it signals the audience that his character is kind of a dick. And that doesn't mean anything in reality, of course, but these tropes exist for a reason because people actually do look at them in a certain way. So Tim isn't doing this case any good by showing that he is, in fact, an asshole. But I guess we already knew that, didn't we?
The end result is a masterclass in how to respond when you're in conversation with someone who disagrees with you. Take a look.
Okay, we'll do that. That's why we're really here, after all, to watch this stuff. The Apple thing was just too good to pass up, so I'm sorry if that bothered anybody. I'm just sure that this isn't going to go anywhere, and Tim's reaction is probably not going to be anything to write home about either. So, let's see.
On the topic, I mean, in terms of your sort of strategy currently, you're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean?
Well, appealing to people's more emotional levels, I would guess. I mean,
What do you mean by that?
certainly you
Give
tap very strong ideological language quite frequently.
Like what?
Okay, this is just doing Greg Kuchel's nonsense, but going back to the Apple thing for a second, sorry, I'll try to keep it brief. It is just rude to be holding an interview and then eating at the same time, apple or not. Nobody wants to watch you eat. Nobody wants to hear you struggle to speak with food in your mouth. Fuck off. I'd like to think this is a scheduled interview. It's not like the journalist just found this dipstick in an apple grove somewhere, so it's a matter of complete disrespect on the part of the politician, and again, just fuck this guy. If that's the lesson that Tim wants us to take away from this, then yes, some people are assholes. But this isn't even my original point, but I guess it works anyway. What a jerk. So let's see this interview ramble on until we get back to Tim, because if this is supposed to be something to be impressed by, I'm just not seeing it.
Left wing, this and that, right wing, I mean, it's that type of ideological spectrum.
I never really talk about left or right.
Anyways, I don't
really believe in that.
Okay, this is a crappy journalist too, but before we get back to Tim, eventually I guess, this is just a distraction tactic. The politician just doesn't want to respond to any of the questions, so he's just throwing out a ton of distractions in hopes that the journalists will just lose their way. This is not honesty, which I guess, being a politician, we shouldn't expect it to be, but this is why people think politicians are jerks. Mostly because they are. If they were legitimate, then they should be able to answer straightforward questions, and none of them ever seem to be. I'm sure that Tim is going to try to spin this as something positive, but it's not. Anyone who ever treats you like this, they do not deserve your vote, and they probably deserve a punch in the face. This is what an asshole looks like. Fuck these people.
A lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Like which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but...
Like who?
I don't know who, but...
Well, you're the one who asked the question, so
yeah.
You must know somebody.
Okay, I'm sure there's some out there, but anyways, the point of this question is, I mean, why should Canadians trust you with their vote, given, you know, not just the sort of ideological inclination in terms of taking the page out of Donald Trump's book, but
what are you
also
talking about? What page? What page? Can you give me a page? Give me the page. You keep saying
in terms of turning things quite dramatically in terms of Trudeau and the left wing and all of this. I mean, you make quite a, you know, it's quite a play that you make on it. So I'm
not
just
sure.
Wondering.
I don't know what your question
Okay,
is.
then forget that. Why should Canadians trust you with their vote?
Common sense.
That went on for an unnecessarily long time, and I did consider cutting it, but I really hate to do that. I put the entire video in so nobody can accuse me of taking anything out of context, and while I really can't imagine what Tim might need any of this nonsense for, I figure we might as well just give it to him, prove that we're nicer than he is, as well as giving my Canadian viewers a reason not to vote for any of these idiots. I mean, I don't think anyone ought to vote for anyone that hasn't actually earned it anyway, which means that nobody would ever fill any of these offices because all of these people suck. But is that really a bad thing? Hasn't voting for the lesser of the two evils only put evil into the branches of government? But let's not make this unnecessarily political and get back to Tim, because that's what we're here for after all, isn't it?
All right, let's cut it off there. I want you to notice two things about this interaction. First, Pierre Poilievre uses no less than 7 simple questions to disarm this journalist.
No, he used questions for no other reason than to avoid his responsibility for answering. And that's exactly why apologists do it too. They can offer nothing intelligent to the questions they are asked, so they do everything in their power to avoid actually having to do so. Once you understand what they're doing and why, and the dishonest reasons behind it, it's impossible not to see it everywhere. And that's why they came up with the Gish Gallop way back in the 70s and 80s, because it gets them out of having to have an honest back and forth conversation with their interlocutors. They don't want that, because that's dangerous. If they actually had to speak to the other side, not about them, not around them, but actually to them, then people would know that they're just con men who are only in it for a buck, with no rational reasons to believe what they profess to believe. This is dishonesty, and this is Tim saying, well, here's why you ought to be dishonest. Is anybody really surprised by that? Because I know I'm not.
Notice how the reporter accuses Poilievre of taking the populist pathway and using a page out of Trump's playbook. In response, he neutralizes these accusations by 2 simple questions, or at least 2 kinds of questions.
No, he doesn't. He simply deflects. He doesn't say, well, I'm not doing X, or here's why I'm doing X. I don't know, I pay no attention to Canadian politics. He is not answering the question at all. He's just avoiding it. Now, the reporter being an idiot doesn't help. He's probably some crackpot from Canadian YouTube or something, but trying to talk as fast as they can so that the politician can't escape, that's not really doing anyone any favors. I figure a more skilled journalist wouldn't have let any of these things go down, which is why people have to be aware of these tactics and be able to defeat them. You can't let these morons get away with dishonesty. Because whether you're talking politics or religion, you're going to run into an awful lot of dishonest people.
The first is, what do you mean by that? This is the clarification question.
Except it's not. It's just a distraction. That is why it's being used. The questions are getting uncomfortable, so let's try to distract them down a rabbit hole where they can go off into more comfortable ground. The politician clearly didn't want to talk about that, or he would have, and the reporter was just too dumb to see that he was getting railroaded. This is why it's so important to see the tactics being used and know how to put a stop to it. They do not want to be called out on their bullshit. Not the religious, not the political. It's why they're doing this in the first place. Don't let them get away with it.
When someone says something and you're not sure what they mean, or someone calls you a name, or someone makes an accusation against you, it's important to clarify what they mean.
That's not what happened, Tim. This was a pure distraction. Every time you see the religious pull this, and that's all it is, call them out on the distraction tactics. Yes, if it's legitimate and they really do want clarification, then by all means, give it to them and then get right back on track. Do not let them change the direction of your inquiry, because that's exactly what they're trying to do. You can't allow yourself to get sidetracked by, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by is? Or whatever the hell they're doing. That's why they fast talk, because they're desperately trying to get away. Don't allow it.
In this interview, Polyev is accused of obviously taking the populist pathway. In response, he asks, what do you mean by that? This is a brilliant question.
No, it wasn't. If he actually wanted to deny it, then he would have denied it. Or he would have confirmed it, whatever his actual position happened to be. Instead, because he didn't want to answer, because no answer he could have provided would have made him look good, he just deflected. Nowhere in that actual interview did he say what he actually thought. He said nothing, which was the whole point. There was a whole lot of lip flapping and nothing of substance coming out. This was a meaningless interview because he didn't want to respond. He just wanted to run away and hide, but he knew that would make him look even worse, so he did the next best thing, and he just diverted the journalist into irrelevancies. The religious do the same thing all the time because they don't want to get cornered either. It's why they don't want to talk to us as much as possible, because they know that they have no chance in a serious back and forth. They just have to play word games.
Before he can respond to the claim, he needs to get clarification on the claim. So he asks, what do you mean by that?
Now, I figure that Tim knows better, having spent all that time around the conman Greg Kukl, but he's not going to be honest about it because honesty makes Tim look bad, and it might cost him some followers and, of course, some money. There's a difference between asking legitimate questions that you want actual clarifications on and doing what politicians and apologists do, which is trying to run around with the goalposts until they can make a break for the door. As I've said before, they want control over the venue so they don't get backed into a corner where they look terrible, which maybe this encounter wasn't planned. Maybe the journalist did just catch him out in the open in an apple field, and the politician just had to blabber something until they could make good their escape. I don't know, but this is not how rational people communicate. This is fear. Learn to recognize it.
The second question in Polyev's arsenal is, how do you come to that conclusion, or some variation of it?
Again, it's fair if it leads to more conversation, not less, but not as the distraction that he was using it as. Because if it was honest, the conversation stops, a clarification is made, and then it just starts again where it left off, all without filling your mouth with food and looking around for an exit strategy. Now, maybe this jackass called for security to escort the reporter from the premises, I don't know, but it's really why all of them, politicians and apologists alike, they rely on script so heavily. They are only saying what they think that people want to hear. But that doesn't make any of it true, does it?
This is a demand for evidence. When the journalist accuses Polyev of using very strong ideological language, he asks, like what?
That would be a legitimate point. if that was how the actual encounter had played out. Instead, as we all know, it was just a dodge, and dodges are never impressive. Now, I'd love to see the same thing with an actual skilled journalist who could see these things coming a mile away and knew how to stop them in its tracks. But that's not what Tim used, because I think Tim knows just how bad that would make the politician look. And Apologist too. It always makes Apologists look bad, which is why they don't want to talk to us. Because we know better and they've got an image to keep up. How do you fleece the gullible otherwise?
Rather than get defensive or lose his cool, Polyev simply asked for some evidence for the claim.
No, he was defensive the whole time. Were we watching the same video? That's all he was doing. That's all the whole questioning thing was. Him being defensive. Of course, he knows how to keep his cool because he's on camera, and these people are just actors with a bigger paycheck and more power. But that doesn't mean that he said anything of any substance. In fact, that was kind of the whole point, to avoid saying anything that could hurt him in the long run. A whole lot of hot air and a whole lot of nothing else. That's politics for you.
When he's accused of taking a page out of Donald Trump's book, he asks, "What page? Give me the page." Unfortunately, this reporter thought he could get away with slogans rather than substance, and these questions put that on full display.
That's the problem, though. Incompetent reporter and wily politician. It doesn't make either of them worthwhile. Now, I know that from Tim's perspective, this is gold, but I just look at it and think, well, more con men, what else is new? This is what happens when you're able to look at the world from outside of a particular ideological echo chamber. None of this actually looks good. It just looks like con men being con men, because that's all it actually is. And it's why religion and politics are both such a mess. These are the kind of people that are involved. And that's sad, isn't it?
So the first thing I want you to notice is Polyev's masterful use of questions. Second, I want you to notice how comfortable Polyev looks during this entire exchange.
Being a comfortable shyster is still being a shyster. It's why pedophile priests can be perfectly calm while still being despicable pedophiles. It's something that politics and religion teaches you, unless crying might get you sympathy, then,
Doesn't he look totally relaxed, just enjoying his apple?
being an asshole. Sure, but being relaxed doesn't mean being credible. It doesn't mean being honest. And it sure doesn't mean being right. Lots of criminals are relaxed on the stand, but they're still criminals. This is what happens when you're trained to think that being relaxed is the same as being right. This is what happens when you care more about your image than you do about the truth. Because appearance doesn't matter as much as being honest does. But I guess when you're part of a dishonest cult, as theists all are, what do you expect?
This isn't a coincidence. By skillfully using questions, he's able to stay out of the hot seat and in the driver's seat in this conversation. Questions keep you safe, even when you're being questioned by a journalist.
And you only care about getting votes, or I guess in the case of the religious, getting money. This is why, when we do videos about Greg Kukl or other apologists who are talking tactics, instead of talking truth, they're just talking, well, here's how we get where we want to go. It's very, very telling. They aren't interested in the truth. They only care about looking truthful to the people on their side. They only care about appearing honest, not being honest. Because whether or not they actually are, that doesn't matter, so long as they can con people into believing that they are, and those same people keep filling the collection plates to keep them happy. Well, that's all they're after. It's all a sham. And it's a shame the religious can't figure that out, isn't it?
So whatever your political leanings, I think we can all appreciate this masterclass in using good questions in tough conversations.
And there he goes again, being an asshole. Because the only thing this video taught anyone is that Tim Barnett and that asshole from Canada are complete shysters. Nobody here actually cares about the truth. They only care about the appearance of truth, and religion shows that all the time. From my perspective, though, what difference does any of it make? So long as I have the truth, or at least as close as I can come based on the evidence that I have at hand, looks don't matter. I just want to know what's actually going on to the best of my ability to tell, and the more that we listen to these people talk, the more it's obvious that they don't. In fact, I have had people ask me if I think that these people believe any of it, or if they're just playing make-believe for a paycheck. And honestly, it is really hard to know. Now, I'd hope they believed it, but we know from people who get into the clergy project that lying for the Lord is a very time-honored tradition just so you get paid, and it's just very appealing to people with questionable morals. Even if you don't believe it anymore, if you ever did, standing up there week after week after week, telling these silly stories and watching those collection plates circulate, that is a hard thing to walk away from. Unless you find some honesty, and I think we all know plenty of people in the church never do that. And it's not just the church, lots of people everywhere don't do that, but this is a channel where we look at religion, so there you go. So long as they have tactics to keep the money rolling in, and it doesn't really matter if any of it is true, they will keep doing it, because truth doesn't matter for far too many people. If I ever get to be like that, somebody shoot me, because I just don't want to live that way. Do you?